let's just switch over to the create section. It's a lot more, I think, straightforward than anything else here. We're just going to talk about the basics, the box, the cylinder, mirroring, and some patterns. And then we're going to talk about sculpt option separately. So the box, and again, if you need anything else from the create section, you can always pin it to the top. It's just the things that I'm using most of the time, I would say. So the box, super straightforward, same logic just like before. You select the instrument, select the face it's going to be applying to, and just drag it out. And before you confirm, as always, you have your dialog box on the right or on the left if you want. It's completely a drag and drop. And then you define your dimensions of what you're creating. And you can also enter them here. Each instrument, each tool is going to have its own dialog box. Remember that. Right now, the operation is really tied in with the modify section, so it's maybe a little difficult to understand at first, but I'm gonna do my best to explain that. Most of the time, if it's from scratch, it's gonna be a new body. But if you're adding another cube on top of this cube, for example, so we're gonna take another cube. We're not gonna create it from this construction plane. We can start from any face that is flat, just like with everything else. The limitation of Fusion for now is that you cannot start your sketches or primitives from curved faces, only flat stuff. So let's say we're starting from this top face, and we're gonna draw a little box in the corner. And now the operation comes in handy because the first thing that it's suggesting is to join, which means it wants to merge the big cube and the small cube. But we can tell this operation to, you know what, let's cut it. So because we dragged it up, if it was cutting, it would be dragging down. So let's see, this would be cutting the box. It also happens automatically depending on the direction you're dragging. So if you're dragging outward, it's going to be joining or suggesting the join operation. If you're going to be dragging in, it's going to suggest cutting because it understands that you're intersecting two objects. And this is one of the main differences between polygon modeling and CAD. All these objects are treated as solid. That's why it's called solid body modeling. They're all basically filled inside. So in real world, if you took two pieces of metal, like two metal cubes, there's no way they would be able to intersect. So logically, joining them together, yes. Joining them together like this, it's only possible through making this cut. Another one that it's never going to suggest is intersect because it's optional. That means it's only going to create the intersection between the new body and the old body. You can see that that's where the old body was ending. But I rarely use that, almost never. So cut, join. It can also suggest you to create a new body, which means it's not cutting, it's letting it stay in there. But this makes, like, because it's 3D software, of course you can allow for that, but it doesn't make any sense to have a solid body inside of a solid body unless you're just creating it like this and you want it to be separate. You don't want it to join like that. You want it, if you, let me show you what happens when you join. When you join it, it's in the browser, it's one solid body and it has a common edge. And that edge can be treated a certain way. We're going to talk about it later. If I go back and recreate this cube, and the operation is going to be new body, there's two separate bodies. This, I cannot stress enough how important this is. A lot of times, all of your frustration is going to come from you created something like a cylinder and you totally forgot about whether you wanted it to join or make it into a new body, and you just leave it as joined, and then later you're spending hours figuring out why is it that you cannot move the cylinder, why is it stuck to the cube. There's I would say just think that it's impossible to separate them at this stage. There are certain tricks, of course, but it's just important to keep that in mind as you're creating that. But again, with the demo, you're gonna see how I'm thinking about it as I'm adding more geometry to the model. Just like in Sketch, we have a mirror, and it's pretty convenient. Sits right here or in the drop down menu over here. It's important to notice that Fusion allows you to mirror faces, but 99% of the times you're going to be mirroring bodies. So don't forget to switch from face to body here, and then choose the body that you want to mirror. You can select multiple bodies at the same time. So for example, 1, 2, and then mirror plane. You don't have to draw a mirror plane separately because you can use any face of any object to mirror on. In our case, we can use this face, and you can see the preview, how it's going to mirror. Or discard the selection and say, let's mirror on this face. Or if you, before you go into the tool, you can just create a different face and mirror on that. We're also, let's just take a look at patterns. It's kind of self-explanatory. I mean, let's say we create a cylinder like that, and we want to have small cylinders going around this cylinder in a circular fashion where we cannot join, so we need to say new body. Okay, because it needs to stay separate. And then we're gonna go into circular pattern. It's gonna ask us, what do you want to pattern? Do you want to pattern faces? Or we're just gonna say, nope, we need to pattern bodies. Then pick the body and select the axis it's gonna be patterned on. In this case, you can select an existing pattern or an existing axis, just like the cylinder has this. But you can also draw it separately. We're going to pick this one. It gives us a preview. And we also get the control on the quantity. So let's say we can put 10, we can type that in. We can also use the slider to make it less or more for convenience. We can also as you can see, the bodies, the would-be bodies have the check marks. You can just remove that or bring it back. So let's say, okay, this gave us this many bodies and that. There are certain times when, and of course, if you go to patterns, there are multiple patterns. I'm encouraging you to try everything out just to see how everything works. I would say pattern on a path is probably a tricky one, so I have to show you. You have to have a path for that pattern to happen, and you can define it or find it in the body. So for example, we say this object, this body, and this is going to be the path. In this case, it's very similar to circular pattern with its own settings, but it's a lot more interesting when you start to create your paths. So you actually draw them, or which I forgot to mention, when you're creating a line, when you're using a line tool, if you click and then click and hold, it will allow you to create a curve like this. Then click OK. So basically now we can go into pattern on the path, take this body, and tell Fusion to put it on this path. As you can see, the path needs to start where the body is. So let's try it one more time. This is the body. This is the path. Quantity, you can bring that up or use the slider. Let's clean this up real quick. Just want to mention that other than, like, for example, in the circular pattern, right now it says bodies or faces. You can pattern, it's kind of like counterintuitive, but you can pattern openings and holes and faces. Let's say that instead of having a body that's additional to this top surface, we're going to subtract from that top surface, so it's going to be a hole. And you can actually pattern that hole. It's something that you have to really think about when you're talking about, so to speak, CAD logic. In order to pattern that hole, you need to go into circular pattern, select faces, because there are no bodies. If you select bodies, you only have one body to select. It's this one, the one that has a hole in it. But what you want to do is you want to select faces, point to this face, select the axis, and it's giving you a preview of placement for those faces. So you're just going to say, give me 4. Click OK. So now you have patterned a hole or an opening or something, something very specific. But this doesn't always work. You just need to remember that Fusion, the best way to think about models in Fusion is that they resemble how things work in real life with real life physics. So it's very different from polygonal modeling, and there are a lot more limitations with how things work. You'll just need to explore that for yourself and get used to it.